Welcome to If Prices Could Talk, the podcast where we dive into the art and science of pricing, sales, and negotiation. I'm your host, Tracy Dent. Join me as we explore strategies and current events shaping the future of pricing power in B2B, featuring insights from industry leaders and subject matter experts. Let's jump into today's conversation. So Per, thank you for coming onto the podcast. We've got Per from Chief Outsiders. He is a CMO. He's a partner from Chief Outsiders, and then Pete Morelli, who is from Holden Advisors. And we thought we would talk about private equity. Let me just read off some of the topics here. So we've got private equity. Per does a lot of actually projects in private equity, as does Pete. Industrials, and then going through challenges and opportunities for 2025. Pricing strategies, of course. See how we can cover some tariff-related topics, and then aligning stakeholders between the private equity firm, the CEO of the portco, and other people involved in major decisions, and overall just some other topics in value creation specific to industrials. So I think, Per, maybe you can kick us off and tell us a little bit about your background and what Chief Outsiders does.
Sure. Yeah, Per Ohstrom. And in case you wonder about my funny accent or lack of accent, depending on how you see it, I grew up in Sweden, incidentally, but I've been here for a great long while by now. I've been working with manufacturing companies for the last 30 years, I guess. A lot in heavy manufacturing, paper mills, chemical plants, stuff like that, but also in equipment manufacturing, equipment rental, and most recently, in the last 5 years or so, when I've been with Chief Outsiders, I've done a lot of construction, civil engineering, industrial construction, commercial construction, stuff like that, equipment rental, industrial services. So very much in the manufacturing and industry space, sometimes in manufacturing, sometimes in services, sometimes in both. Chief Outsiders, we are a consulting company of sorts. There's about 120 of us. Most of us are CMOs, Chief Marketing Officers. Some of us are CSOs, Chief Sales Officers. So we offer our clients help with getting their marketing house in order, but also getting the sales house and revenue generation house in order. And of course, we are very big on aligning the two, right? Because they are and should be joined at the hip, sales and marketing.
Yeah, for sure. And therein lies a lot of excitement.
And I'm excited because, in my old world thinking of the 4 Ps of marketing, price is obviously a component therein. And we can also think at Holden Advisors very similarly, connecting the set price side of the commercial spectrum to the get price side. And I think we'll kind of have a lot of common perspective, but also differences that we see, which we'll get into.
Well, let's talk about some of the things that you're seeing with clients in the last couple of months, because there's a lot happening with tariffs. There's a lot happening with deal activity and just general, commentary about what things are going to happen and not happen this year. So just high level thoughts on the last couple of months and your observations on what's happening.
Yeah, I think the companies that we have been working with, the latter half of last year was, oh my God, if just the election is over, we can get back to work. And now it's like, oh my God, the election is over. Now what are we going to do?
Right.
Because the kind of that certainty and the straight path forward that a lot of people were expecting, no more surprises, let's have steady rules so we know what. So we know the boundaries to stay within, and it's just not happening, right? So there's still a lot of kind of confusion, and the interest rates are going to remain high. That's what it seems like, and there's just a lot of trepidation, around what are we going to do, and I think on the deal side, we see more stuff like maybe carve outs and going after distressed assets, that kind of stuff, rather than the big, grand acquisition schemes that we saw a few years ago.
Yeah, Per, I think it's similar. I think that both the uncertainty, well, first of all, the word uncertainty, one of my colleagues, stated it eloquently, I thought, yesterday when we were talking, that, this word uncertainty for the past 5 years has been in the vernacular in some way, shape, or form Now, the causes of it have been different. There was inflation for a while. There's sort of this, well, what are interest rates going to do? Now there's tariffs. So kind of like the driver has been shifting, but I think there's just been this climate of uncertainty, and sometimes there's almost more uncertainty in the way people are feeling about the economy than the metrics would suggest. Generally, the last few years has been a very strong economy by just GDP growth, et cetera. So that's one interesting lens. And then I think the other uncertain piece, it's just kind of a leading to your point. Maybe there was a platform company that we were going to maybe sell to the bigger fish in private equity, just upstream, and maybe that's not happening because now the valuation is going to be a little bit lower because interest rates will either get higher or stay high, and now tariffs will impact our supply chain and probably our cost basis, and then an acquirer is going to look at that unfavorably. So I think there is a little bit more of a hesitancy to make exits or do deals in the same size that you might have expected as recently as last year, really.
No, I agree, and I think a lot of the private equity portfolio companies, especially that we work with, they're very much focused on operational improvement right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they do whatever they can to kind of improve the valuation. And then, of course, they got thrown a good curveball now if indeed, input costs do go up because of tariffs. And that's really hard to hedge against, right? Because there's only, for instance, steel, there's only so much steel made in the US.
Yeah.
It's not enough for everyone, right? So if you can lock it in, you're good. If not, you're out of luck. So there's things like that that are really difficult to juggle.
Yep. Yeah, and it's not easy to switch suppliers of steel or aluminum in the same way that you can for other commodities or goods, for sure.
Sure. Sure. Sure. And I think another thing we see, besides industrials that are doing, semi okay still, the tech sector is doing pretty good. So we get a lot of inquiries from tech companies. There's still some activity going on there. Healthcare, same thing. It's a little bit insulated from kind of the big, I guess, international economic forces, right? Because it's mostly a domestic industry. But there's still uncertainty there around, what is really going to happen, especially with federal support and the insurance systems. All of that is now a little bit up in the air. But we still see a lot of smaller companies that do a lot of really interesting stuff in healthcare. And a lot of it kind of is in that intersect between healthcare and technology, right? So it's remote medicine and it's robotics and stuff like that.
Mm-mm. When you were talking about distressed assets, can we talk about that a bit? What are some of the things that you're seeing just in terms of what's working, the things that people are doing for value creation just inside of industrials?
Yeah, I think oftentimes when companies get acquired, part of the investment thesis is all around efficiencies and saving money. And usually that works for, several months, several years sometimes, right? You can kind of eke out efficiencies that way. And we see a lot of companies that do lean initiatives and they do, they re-engineer manufacturing processes, business processes. They beat down their vendors, right? So they do purchasing efficiency initiatives and stuff like that, and that's all fine and well. But you can't really kind of starve yourself into growth, right? You have to in the end start looking kind of outside the company, and I think that's where we oftentimes come in, right? So companies are like, we don't even know our market position. We don't even know our competitors. So it's really important for portcos to have a good understanding of the competitive set. Who do they compete against? Not only directly, but what are the substitutes? Because there's always different ways of solving a customer need, right? So we see a lot of kind of market research, competitor analysis, demand for those kinds of things. And sometimes in industrials, you can go into some detail, right? Because it's pretty much known what other companies, what assets they have. And if you're familiar with the industry, you can basically look at a plant and you can guesstimate what their capacities are, right? You can count how many gas tanks they have in the back and how many rail lines go in and out of the yard, right? So there's a lot that can and should be done kind of on that. And then the other thing that people do, automation, right? And they have already automated everything inside the company. So now they need to start thinking about digitalizing and automating marketing. So that's another, very lucrative area for us, where we do digital marketing analysis and we look at their tech stack, and we recommend to them, this is the bare minimum you need to do to get up to kind of industry standard. But if you really want to shine, we suggest that you do A, B, and C.
What are some of the biggest surprises that you've seen in that category?
Oh my God, where to start? I worked with one company year and a half ago. Their website was from 1999, and they were happy. It was working just fine. The screen was this small, right? So you could barely see it on a modern computer. You see stuff like that. You see the marketing department oftentimes is somebody's niece doing social media. Yeah, we invest in marketing. I'm exaggerating a little bit now, but not much. Industrial companies are kind of by definition sales driven, right? But there's still a need for a strong and astute marketing function, because marketing can provide the ammunition to the sales force and tell them where to go hunt.
Yes. Yeah.
But if you leave the salespeople to their own devices, oh my God, they're just going to call on the people they already know and take their friends out to dinner and go play golf. Again, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much. So you really need kind of a marketing function that on an ongoing basis can generate leads, can understand what's going on in the marketplace. Keep an ear to the ground, as it were.
Yeah, I like your framing of kind of inside versus outside the four walls of a company. Certainly, cost is one thing you mentioned. I mean, we don't do a lot of work in cost optimization. We're more about the price, the top line, the growth for revenue, those levers. But you do have to consider kind of contribution margin for a lot of this manufacturing work, so you can kind of appropriately assign margins and where to focus and where to play by your segments. But yeah, I completely agree. I love the perspective of you need to look outside the four walls, because I think the same concept that we just talked about with uncertainty, just the speed of change, I think just look at technology, adoption, and new trends. And I think the same thing is true for markets, your competition, your internal product development, and NPIs. So all of these factors are changing, which means your differentiation in the market in different segments is either decreasing or increasing almost constantly. And so I think the other thing with marketing that probably is akin to how we think about pricing is it's not just a flash in the pan one-time event. You really need to build an ongoing capability and monitoring to make sure there's a constant flow of information both inside your organization, but also going out about your value proposition and the why customers should buy and the financial impact they'll experience, particularly in B2B when they do partner and purchase from you. So I think those absolutely resonate, the points that you're seeing. And I think those are sort of, they never really go out of style in some ways. They've sort of been the constants. The way we conduct a project may change. Digital could be different than old world, just print, but really the purpose of it remains constant.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And companies need to have a good understanding of who they're up against, and they need to understand not just who the big ones are and how concentrated the market is, but they also need to understand which new ones are coming in, right? And what business models they have and what they are doing differently. And oftentimes it's not massive technological innovation that makes for a better competitor. It can be simple things like they have a much stronger culture, or they have a much more singular focus on growth, or singular focus on meeting customer needs. So kind of the strategic attitude you have as a company is very, very important as well. Are you the low cost provider? Well, then you have everything you do has to be low cost, right? So you don't have a big sales force. You have a phone number, 1-800 order stuff, right? And you don't have a lot of people that outside of the actual manufacturing that do a lot of things, but you really kind of keep your costs down. if you're customer focused, then you better have an office, inside your customer's fence, and you need to sit in on all the meetings, and you need to know exactly what's going on. You need to know their product development pipeline, right? So you already know how you can help them before something even comes out. It's really important that you kind of pick a strategic attitude, and that's the one you use. You can't be just a little bit of everything, because that never works. It
I would
really is.
imagine in the understanding of that, there's probably cases where you make recommendations that it's time to change the business model, or it's time to switch from, for example, cost plus to value-based pricing. For the latter, how do you discern the best way to push people along that journey? What is that like?
It, I think that the argument is fairly easy to make, because any price improvement you can do falls straight to the bottom line and increases the valuation of your company, right? Anything you can do on price, any price increase you can do are pure gain, right? So that usually gets people's attention. But then once you start kind of poking around in what does this really mean, how can we better understand what the customer needs? How can we better understand what we sell? How what we sell contributes to the overall value of what they sell, right? Because in B2B, the demand is always derived, right? It's always what they sell that kind of drives the demand. It's not what we offer. That's never the case. So an example, I used to work in the chemical.
You can't fit 3 engines on a 2-engine plane.
No, you can. You can.
Yeah.
And I used to work in the chemical industry, and for instance, if you make a printing ink or a paint, there's a lot of inexpensive ingredients that go into that can, right? But there's also a few really expensive ones. Pigments is usually one of them. So you want to get away with using as little pigment, as low percentage of pigment as possible, and if you can help a customer to use half of the pigment by selling them a dispersing aid, say, that disperses the pigment better throughout the paint or throughout the ink, then you can fairly easily calculate, how much is it worth for them to use only half the amount of pigment. So maybe it's a $20 per pound product that they now only have to pay $10 for. So there's $10 for me, theoretical pricing space that I can take, right? So I can charge $5 for my dispersing aid, and they still save $5, right? So that's a typical, stereotypical maybe example of value pricing. But it's also having them understand, what we sell them, how does that contribute to the value of whatever they sell? And sometimes that involves, working with them and with their customers to really kind of understand what do their customers in turn use it for.
We often find when we're trying to do voice of the customer or value research to get exactly to the point that you were talking about. I can think of so many examples that are working with in commodity agriculture or food supply, different ways that you can spray the sugar coating on cereal.
Right.
One of those might need daily cleaning, but from another manufacturer supplier of that nozzle, maybe it's only every other day. So the math is the same as what you just said, but it ends up being very real to, their costs. And of course, there might be other value-based solutions, services, products that you deliver that are more on the revenue generation side. Like maybe it's productivity in a factory. So there's different ways that helps. But getting to the core of that to really find out what the value is. We, of course, value research, talking direct to customers. There's no better source to get that information. You can hypothesize it internally, so you have some informed point of view as you enter the conversation. But certainly when, some of our clients have very concentrated customers where there's just a handful of key accounts and that's generating 80% of their revenue. And you can very much have qualitative conversations and really get to not only, a few customers in, whatever, just a few weeks time, but you can also discover unprompted value drivers. So maybe you actually didn't even realize why your client is being purchased versus a competitor or an in-house alternative or a do nothing, whatever the status quo is. And then in other situations, there's sort of a long tail of very small customers, very distributed, and you want to think about a survey, and then kind of best in class is sometimes you might do both, where you kind of learn in depth with small conversations, then you kind of go out to validate with kind of a survey. How do you think about that with your clients and in your marketing projects?
I, I'm totally with you. That's
Yeah.
exactly the way I approach projects as well. To really understand, really talk to customers, really get to that voice of the customer. And we do it with deep interviews. We do it with focus groups sometimes, if it's feasible for competition reasons. And we also do surveys. And that's kind of a if you ask questions that are open-ended enough and kind of gently guide people into talking about value, that sometimes gives you really good information. Another source of information is if you do a win-loss type analysis, right?
Hmm.
And you talk to people that you didn't get, that your client didn't get. What was it? Why didn't you buy? And then that can yield some real interesting insights as well. Just of the kind
Aren't
you
those the
mentioned.
most fun conversations? Like they'll take your call least frequently, but when they do, it becomes a therapy session where you're hearing everything about what's wrong with your
Yeah,
client.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And yeah,
Finally, somebody cares about my business
yeah.
problems.
In your experience, okay, so you've got like you're either brought in through the CEO of the Portco or through the private equity firm, right? You've both experienced both ends of this. Can you paint me a picture of what it's like through one lens and what it's like through the other lens so we can kind of contrast how to align these two? Because it feels to me like this can be not necessarily your responsibility, but partially your I don't know, you kind of trip into it because you're trying to move things forward and figure out strategy and get them to make decisions. So can you tell me a little bit about those two scenarios and what that's like?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of a caricature, right? That the PE firm, they want to really crank up the valuation and exit as soon as possible and make as much money as possible. Whereas the CEO and her leadership team want to build a long-term viable business, and oftentimes it might even be an old family business or a mid-sized company
Yeah.
that they have worked in and their parents have worked in. So it gets emotional and all that stuff as well. But I think if oftentimes if we do work with a portfolio company and they can kind of see that the approach that we use, we do the digital marketing evaluation, we do benchmark the marketing and selling functions, how they kind of stack up against industry standard, right? And we can make some recommendations oftentimes already in the first few weeks or months. If you only do this, then it's going to help you. But then we work through an engagement, and typically we're at it for maybe 3 months or more. And we kind of help them set a strategy and help them define what markets to go after, what market segments to go after, what's the value proposition that's going to resonate with that market segment. But the PE firm will see that we approach this kind of in a general fashion. So if it works really well in one of their portcos, chances are that they'll bring us to the next one that has similar issues or that has other issues that are kind of in the marketing and sales arena. So that's oftentimes how that kind of works with PE firms. Good work gives you more good work. Sometimes we deal directly with the portfolio company, and then you have to really think about reporting and who you keep in the loop and what you tell whom, right? Because there might be one cadence kind of meetings and business improvement in the portco, but the owners might be much more impatient. So that sometimes makes for a little bit more, puts more demand, higher demands on frequent communication.
Yeah, Per, I think that I see that too. It's interesting. I feel like the almost the stereotype of the private equity versus owner versus the
Mhm.
management relationship is seated in this sort of 1980s Gordon Gekko greed is good, leverage buyout type of PE world where it was just cost takeouts and two different points of view about what the company wanted versus what the ownership wanted. And I think in the past decade, there's really been more of a convergence where ownership or the private equity firms realize there's very much a partnership that's required. And I think there's less of an us and them than there was previously, because there has to be an alignment about what's good for the goose is good for the gander. A little bit more patience, probably, for some of the environmental factors that we discussed earlier, with interest rates and sort of uncertainty. And I think whether you come in at the management level, that's where your relationship is, or the private equity, often it's the case that we see anyways. It's typically not the PE company that's contracting with us as a service provider. They're making a recommendation, and ultimately the management team has to feel comfortable with you being a partner sitting alongside them. And if that trust is not there, it's not going to work, and nothing the private equity firm says is going to get you a project there.
Yeah. No, it's very true, and I think it has an analog in the corporate world as well, because I've had different type of staff type jobs, worked with marketing on a divisional level, and then sometimes I would go out to one of the operating companies or operating divisions in the equipment rental business, and sit down, and you can tell that people are suspicious, right? Yeah, he's probably here to spy on us. He's here from headquarters, right? And I cannot just say, I'm from headquarters and I'm here to help you, because that doesn't work at all, right? So you really have to work with people, and you have to get to the actual work, right? So they understand that what you bring actually helps them, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, I guess, with Chief Outsiders, if I can toot our horn for just half a second. All of us consultants are experienced, right? So you have to have worked for 25 or 30 years, and you have to have run marketing and or sales in a $1 billion company, right, in order to be considered for Chief Outsiders. So what we sell is not just subject matter expertise in our field, but we also sell gray hair and battle scars. And we have been in the room where it happens, right? And we have been there when the big elephants have been dancing. So sometimes we're able to kind of give advice, built on general business insights and business experience that are very, very valuable. For example, we had an opportunity to work with, not me, but one of my colleagues, an opportunity to work with a bakery, and they, really had to, they had great demand for the product, and they tried to crank up the production, and it's not easy, right? What do? Hotter ovens, or, and shorter baking times. There's certain limitations. You can't just do, speed it all up. So what they ended up doing was they ended up getting wireless sensors, basically glued something onto each machine and each conveyor belt throughout this bakery. And very quickly, within a matter of days, they can figure out where the bottlenecks really were. So if they added one piece of equipment, or they sped up this line, or slowed this conveyor down just a little bit, now all of a sudden they could bake, 2,200 loaves a day instead of 2,000. And just with the same, equipment, and there was no, additional capital or anything. So those are the kinds of things that we sometimes can help them with, right? And of course, on the digital marketing end, there's so much that has happened, and still happens with AI and other things, right? Where we can really, really help our customers, write better proposals faster, or put their existing knowledge base to better use by putting it all in the data lake, right? And have AI fish out the information that's needed. So there's things like that can very quickly kind of show a improvement potential to the portfolio company.
100%. From each of your perspectives, you're just making me think also from an implementation perspective, because there's the recommendations, and then there's like, how do you support the team to actually run with these recommendations? A big part of that is the sales team. If you're going to make adjustments to the offerings themselves, how they're packaged, or the actual price, what are the things that you've seen are most successful in that endeavor?
You know what the 6 most expensive words is in business? Where do I have to be? Right? That's what the lazy salesperson says when the customer pushes back on the price. So where do I have to be to get the business, right? So it really starts with convincing them and showing them, the facts, but also the style and the approach of value selling. That you ask questions, you don't show up and with big slide deck presentations and preach to the customer. You ask a lot of questions, and that's how you show that you understand their business, and that's also how you get information, so you know better about how you price, right? And oftentimes if you start a value pricing initiative, oftentimes you have to kind of take away the pricing power a little bit from the front line and bring it up to the director and maybe to the VP level if there is one, right? Because you need to kind of get those guardrails in place, because it's really difficult to teach old dogs not to sit, right? They're going to do what they always have. So you have to kind of train them and reprogram them a little bit, but usually it's not a big deal anymore, because right now it's difficult to be a salesperson. It's difficult to go out and actually meet somebody face to face, right? Because nobody has time. And even if they do, they prioritize their time differently. And if they're younger, if they're 40 or below, they don't even want to see you, right? They feel uncomfortable talking.
Text me.
Looking people in the eye.
Text me a number.
Yeah. Honestly, and it's like not even a Zoom call. It's sending a text message, right? And that's really uncomfortable if you're in your 50s and a salesperson in the steel industry, right? So there's some amount of kind of retraining that's needed, but also the incentives have to be a little bit different, right? So you don't reward people on top line, you reward them with margin, for instance, or you reward them on number of new customers, or the new business over the last 2 years, or you do stuff like that, right, in order to kind of gently ease them in the right direction.
That's great. And yeah, I think there's an element that you mentioned there that's certainly process orientation about, all right, what's the escalation criteria and who has the control around pricing? And I think one of the bigger things is you sort of getting at this change management aspect. And I think the old dog new tricks thing is absolutely, regardless of age, that's one element of it. But the other is just the inertia of doing things an old way. And part of it is saying, hey, yeah, the structure is going to change, and maybe you don't have as much control on pricing, but you also have all of this new great information about how great you are to your customers, how much money you make them, how much money you save them. And if you just tell them how great you are, you might actually only talk about one aspect of a product or feature, but not really talking about the outcomes and results that you're going to deliver or you have delivered. So give them the value scorecard that shows, hey, here's how much money we're saving you every quarter during the QBR. And so all these new ways that salespeople can kind of demonstrate and showcase their goodness. And then I think it makes it a lot easier to talk about price.
Yeah. No, and I think that especially the scorecard, that you really hit it on the head there. If you have, usually companies have a few large accounts, right, that really do merit a lot of attention, and you really don't want to lose them. And you'll be surprised how many companies do not have a good cadence for reaching out to them. And there's no plan for who talks to whom. You don't do the one-up calls, you don't do the CEO to CEO calls and things like that. But if you simply start doing those kinds of things and have maybe quarterly reviews, and you tell them, okay, we supply you $280,000 worth of products this last quarter, right? And that means that we saved you, X dollars in efficiency. We saved you this much warehousing cost. Because we work just in time, or whatever it is, right? And you remind them all the time that this is really how we help you, right? And you talk not to the purchasing person, because the purchasing person only has one KPI, and that lower prices, right? But you talk to the engineers, you talk to the ops people, you talk to the plant managers, right? The people that actually are able to run your product, right? Because they don't have to clean the sugar nozzles every day. They can do it every other day.
All right, this is my last question, and if you have other things, please. For people looking ahead at the next couple of months with what's happening with tariffs and everything like that, what's a piece of advice that you would give for how to think about what's happening right now? Because one thing that struck me in what you said earlier, Pete, was like, watch where the mindset or telling yourself that we're in uncertain times is impacting the actions that you're taking and not taking.
Yeah.
Are there other things like that you would keep this in mind for Portco CEOs or firms out there that are listening?
I've got
Well,
one.
you
And I think it's the flip side of that same coin. And that is this, is if you just have an open dialogue with your customers in different segments and you demonstrate a genuine curiosity with the cadence at those different levels of the organization, you probably, as a company, are going to be in the best position to respond when things change. Like no one has a crystal ball with headlights that see past 6 months from now. It just typically doesn't happen. So the best way you can, mitigate that risk is to just have really high touch points. And I think customers will feel that they appreciate your outreach and involvement. They'll feel more secure that they have a trusted partner, and therefore they're more likely to conduct business as usual and continue their normal historical purchase behavior. So not only will you learn how they're feeling and the normal, innovation opportunities and co-creation partnerships that are there, but also that there's just like an element of psychology and comfort that shows that you are a stable source in these uncertain times.
No, that's a good one. Another one is if you're buying things, if you're buying components or parts or raw materials, start looking after your house right away, because who knows what kind of supply issues there are going to be. Remember during the pandemic, there was a big crunch on ocean shipping, right? So Walmart was running out of stuff on the shelves. And that's bad, but it's not like life-threatening. But if you're a small company and you really, really need that steel or you really need that lumber in order to build and sell what you do, and you can't get it, or it's 50% more expensive, that can be an existential issue, right?
Yeah.
So there's little things like, maybe building up raw material inventories a little bit if you can afford it, and certainly find additional vendors. I spoke to a commercial construction company just the other week, and they just got a notification that the metal buildings that they buy from a company that kind of designs these metal building kits was going to go up 7%, and that was not going to be the end of it, apparently. So I mean, what do you do? Some of that I'm sure you can pass on, but it's not easy, right? So you gotta you gotta try and impossible as it is, look around the corner, and you gotta try and understand what's going on. And start by reading the papers is pretty good, and read trade press. That's also pretty good. There's organizations out there like ITR that do economic forecasts that are really good, and they can do it by industry sector, and kind of weigh all those data points together and try to have some idea about where things are going. But not panic. That it's also important not to panic and freeze, right? So we're still going to be here, 2 years from now, and it's just a question of how profitable we're going to be, right?
Yeah. Well said. All right. Well, thank you both. Is there anything else you want to cover we didn't touch on?
No, I'd love, Per, thanks so much for joining us. I enjoyed
Well,
having you on the
thanks.
pod.
No, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun, and we had an interesting conversation. I think this is some good stuff.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on, and we'll talk to you
Thank
soon.